Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. You won't believe what happened in their basement. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The New Silence. The suffocating humidity of a late June afternoon clung to me like a second skin as I pushed open the screen door. The familiar creak, a jarring counterpoint to the unnatural quiet next door. Mr. Henderson's house, a squat brick bungalow that had always seemed to hold its breath even on the windiest days, was eerily silent. No morning glory vines weaving their way up the trellis. No rhythmic thump of his ancient lawnmower. Not even the grumpy squawk of his resident squirrel family protesting the lack of scattered birdseed. Just silence. A thick, heavy quiet that pressed against my eardrums, making me acutely aware of the cicada's relentless buzz in the otherwise deserted cul-de-sac. We called it Hendersons Hollow, a silly childhood name that felt strangely apt now, a hollow carved out of our once vibrant little corner of suburbia. Mr. Henderson, the curmudgeon with a heart of surprising gold who'd dispense Werther's originals and life advice in equal measure, had passed away peacefully in his sleep just a week ago. A good way to go, Mrs. Peterson from across the street had sighed, shaking her head sadly. But even in her grief, there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, a nervous curiosity, a hushed whisper about the secrets Mr. Henderson might have taken with him to the grave. Secrets, whispers hinted, that likely resided in his perpetually locked basement. Mark, my perpetually restless best friend, materialized beside me, his gaze fixed on the darkened windows of Mr. Henderson's house. Creepy, right? He muttered, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. Mark, the resident conspiracy theorist and self-proclaimed paranormal investigator, was usually buzzing with nervous excitement at the prospect of anything remotely spooky. But today, even he seemed oddly subdued by the oppressive silence emanating from next door. David, the voice of reason in our chaotic trio, rounded the corner, a frown etched on his usually easygoing face. Guys, come on, he said, his voice low. It's just an empty house. Let's give Mrs. Henderson some space, all right? David was right, of course. But the silence next door was a tangible thing, a weight settling on our chests that made even the most mundane tasks feel heavy. As the days bled into one another, the quiet grew more oppressive. The postman stopped whistling his jaunty tune as he passed Mr. Henderson's mailbox. The neighborhood kids, usually boisterous and carefree, gave the house a wide berth, their laughter replaced by nervous whispers. Even our golden retriever, Max, normally a beacon of enthusiastic tail wags, refused to set paw on Mr. Henderson's lawn anymore, whining anxiously whenever we walked past. The silence was a virus, slowly infecting our once peaceful neighborhood with a strange unease. And as I stared at the empty house, a shiver crawled down my spine, a premonition prickling at the edges of my mind. This quiet wasn't right. It wasn't just the absence of Mr. Henderson. It felt like something else was lurking in the shadows, something waiting to be awakened. Chapter 2. Unearthing Secrets. The oppressive silence stretched on for days, punctuated only by the unsettling symphony of cicadas. Mr. Henderson's house sat like a watchful sentinel, its empty windows seeming to bore into my soul every time I passed. The unease that had settled in my gut after our encounter with the unsettling quiet had only intensified. One sweltering afternoon, a beat-up minivan pulled up in front of Mr. Henderson's house. A woman with a clipboard and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes hopped out. a realtor. The neighborhood grapevine buzzed. Mr. Henderson's house was officially on the market. "Dude, this is our chance." Mark burst through my front door, his eyes shining with a peculiar mix of excitement and apprehension. "We can finally see what's down there." "Down there?" I raised an eyebrow, already dreading where this conversation was headed. "The basement, duh," Mark exclaimed, gesturing wildly towards Mr. Henderson's house. Everyone knows Mr. Henderson was a total recluse. Who knows what creepy stuff he had hidden down there? A shiver danced down my spine. The local legends surrounding Mr. Henderson's basement had always been the stuff of childhood nightmares, whispers of strange lights, disembodied voices, and even something more. The thought of venturing down there filled me with a primal fear. "Mark, that's ridiculous," I countered, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "There's nothing down there except dust bunnies and cobwebs." David, who had been silently observing our exchange, spoke up. "Actually, Sarah, Mrs. Peterson mentioned seeing strange lights flickering down there at night sometimes." "See," Mark practically crowed, "we have to check it out. Just imagine the stories we could tell." "Yeah, stories about getting arrested for trespassing," I retorted, hoping to squash the idea. "Relax, we'll ask the realtor," David said placatingly. "Maybe she'll let us take a quick peek." I wasn't thrilled with the plan, but the combination of Mark's relentless enthusiasm and David's cautious curiosity wore down my resistance. With a resigned sigh, I followed them across the street. The realtor, Miss Carter, greeted us with a professional smile. After explaining her role in selling the house, Mark, ever the charmer, launched into his spiel about being Mr. Henderson's neighbors for life and how much they'd miss him. He then casually mentioned their lifelong fascination with historic basements, hoping to pique her interest. Miss Carter eyed them both with a hint of amusement. "Well, Mr. Henderson's house certainly has some history," she said. "But the basement isn't really part of the standard showing. It's quite dusty," and she hesitated, "a bit musty down there." Mark, ever persistent, pressed on. "Oh, we don't mind a little dust. We're practically experts in historic mustiness," he finished lamely. David, sensing our desperation, interjected. "Look, Mrs. Carter, we understand if it's not possible, but we would be incredibly grateful if you could just let us take a quick peek down there. It would really mean a lot." Miss Carter sighed, her professional smile strained. All right, she conceded. "But just a quick peek, and be careful. The stairs are probably a bit creaky." A thrill of excitement, laced with a healthy dose of apprehension, shot through me. We were actually going down there. Mr. Henderson's basement, shrouded in mystery and local legend, was about to be unveiled. I couldn't help but wonder what secrets it held, and whether we were truly prepared to face them. Chapter 3. The Musty Mall. Mrs. Carter led us down a narrow side passage, the stale air thick with the smell of dust and something vaguely unpleasant. A single bare bulb cast a flickering yellow glow, barely illuminating the steep rickety stairs. Each creaking step echoed through the silence, amplifying the growing knot of apprehension in my stomach. We reached the bottom and emerged into a space that felt like a forgotten tomb. Cobwebs, draped from the exposed brick walls, like macabre tapestries, and dust motes danced in the feeble light. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and vaguely unsettling. Mark, however, was oblivious to the oppressive atmosphere. He bounced around the room like an excited puppy, his flashlight beam bouncing off dusty furniture shrouded in white sheets. David, ever practical, followed closely behind, carefully navigating the uneven floorboards. I, on the other hand, found myself clinging to the rough stone wall, my eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit room. As our eyes adjusted to the gloom, a disturbing tableau unfolded before us. An overturned bookshelf lay in the center of the room, its contents spilling onto the dusty floor, a jumble of leather-bound books with cryptic symbols and titles like The Forbidden Rituals and Unveiling the Veil. A chill snaked down my spine as I recognized some of the symbols from childhood ghost stories, twisted pentagrams and sigils that whispered of dark magic and forbidden knowledge. A sudden gust of wind, seemingly coming from nowhere, extinguished Miss Carter's flashlight. We were plunged into a darkness so profound it felt like a physical entity pressing against our lungs and stealing the air from the room. A primal scream rose in my throat, but before I could utter a sound, Mark's lighter flickered to life, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The flickering light revealed a new horror. Deep gouges marred the wooden floorboards, crude symbols carved into the very heart of the basement. They were the same symbols from the books, a disturbing confirmation of Mr. Henderson's dark pursuits. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating silence. A faint scratching sound echoed from the far corner of the room, sending shivers crawling down my spine. We all spun toward the sound, our flashlights illuminating a small, heavy door hidden behind a dusty sheet. It looked old and warped, like it hadn't been opened in decades. A sliver of darkness peeked through a crack along the edge, a darkness that seemed to writhe and pulsate with an unseen energy. "Whoa," Mark whispered, the excitement in his voice tinged with a hint of fear. "What do you think is behind there?" "Something we should probably leave well alone," I muttered, the weight of dread threatening to crush me. But even as the words left my lips, a spark of morbid curiosity flickered within me. What secrets did that hidden room hold? And were we foolish enough to uncover them? Chapter 4. The Forbidden Door. The heavy wooden door seemed to pulsate in the flickering light, a malevolent presence radiating from the crack along its edge. Silence descended upon us, thick and suffocating, broken only by the frantic pounding of my heart. That wasn't there before, was it? David's voice, barely above a whisper, confirmed the growing terror in my gut. Mark, however, remained unfazed. He crouched beside the door, his flashlight scanning the surface for any sign of a latch or lock. "Probably just settled from the wind," he muttered, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. "Settled? What wind?" I shot back, my voice sharp with rising panic. The air in the basement had been stagnant the entire time. Ignoring me, Mark brushed aside a cobweb, revealing a rusty metal ring embedded in the door. A cruel grin spread across his face. "Bingo! Looks like we found our entrance." My stomach churned. The cryptic symbols from the books, the unsettling carvings on the floor, everything pointed towards this hidden room, being the source of the unsettling atmosphere, perhaps even the source of Mr. Henderson's dark secrets. And yet, Mark was determined to open it. "Mark, this is a bad idea," David pleaded, his brow furrowed in concern. "We don't even know what's in there." "Relax, guys," Mark waved his hand dismissively. "It's probably just some old junk. Besides, wouldn't it be a killer story to tell everyone about the secret room we found in Mr. Henderson's basement?" His words, meant to be reassuring, only fueled my trepidation. Mr. Henderson hadn't kept this room hidden for no reason. There was something in there, something dark and malevolent that didn't want to be disturbed. I could feel it, a palpable presence pressing against my skin, whispering warnings I couldn't quite decipher. There could be more symbols, a way to open it, Mark continued, his voice laced with excitement as he scanned the surrounding brick wall. He wasn't wrong. Upon closer inspection, I noticed faint etchings on the wall beside the door, a series of interconnected lines and shapes that bore an uncanny resemblance to the symbols from the fallen books. A shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't a coincidence. "Mark, there are symbols," I pointed. "Maybe they're the key to opening it." Mark's eyes lit up. He grabbed a dusty book titled Unveiling the Veil from the floor and flipped through its brittle pages, muttering to himself as he scanned the cryptic diagrams. A knot of dread tightened in my chest. He was actually considering using this cursed book to open whatever was lurking behind that heavy door. Just then, a low growl echoed through the basement, a sound that seemed to vibrate within my bones. We all froze, our flashlights darting around the room in search of the source. But the darkness yielded no answers, only an amplified sense of dread. "Did you hear that?" David whispered, his voice barely audible. Mark hesitated, a flicker of doubt clouding his usual bravado. He glanced back at the door, then at the book clutched in his hand. A silent struggle played out on his face between morbid curiosity and a gnawing sense of fear. "Maybe we should leave," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "This doesn't feel right." David nodded fervently. "Yeah, Sarah's right. We've seen enough for one day." Mark looked torn, his eyes lingering on the door. The basement seemed to grow colder, the unseen entity pressing its malevolent presence closer. With a deep breath, Mark slammed the book shut. "Fine," he grumbled, his voice laced with a hint of disappointment. "But we're coming back. We're going to find out what's in there." As we made our way back up the creaking stairs, a sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air. We had escaped the hidden room for now, but I knew in my heart the darkness within wouldn't be easily contained. We had disturbed something ancient, something malevolent, and I feared the consequences would be far-reaching and terrifying. We had awakened something that should have remained hidden, and the silence of Hendersons Hollow would never be the same again. Chapter 5: Whispers in the Dark. We stumbled back up the rickety basement stairs, a suffocating silence pressing down on us. The encounter with the hidden door had left a cold dread clinging to my skin, a premonition of impending doom. Despite Mark's grumbling about leaving unfinished business, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd narrowly escaped a horrifying fate. Reaching the top step, I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me as we emerged into the dusty hallway. But the moment of respite was shattered by a deafening clang that echoed through the house. We all whipped around, hearts pounding in unison. "What was that?" David stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark, his bravado momentarily forgotten, paled visibly. "It came from the basement," he said, his voice tight with fear. We stared at the closed basement door, a dark portal to a world we shouldn't have glimpsed. Another metallic clang resonated from below, followed by a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. This wasn't a stray animal or a loose pipe. This was something more. Panic surged through me. Ignoring the prickling fear that threatened to paralyze me, I lunged for the doorknob. But before I could turn it, a cold gust of wind slammed the door shut with a resounding thud. We were locked in. "Mark, what did you do?" I shrieked, my voice laced with a mixture of terror and fury. Mark, his face ashen, scrambled for the doorknob, his frantic yanking met with only a frustrating rattle. I don't know. I didn't touch anything." The growl from below grew louder, more insistent, accompanied by a sickening scraping sound that sent chills crawling up my spine. My eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape route. But all the windows were boarded shut, relics of Mr. Henderson's reclusive past that now mocked our desperate situation. Suddenly, a book on a dusty shelf tumbled to the floor, its pages fluttering open as if blown by an unseen hand. A primal scream ripped from my throat. This wasn't a coincidence. The entity we'd glimpsed in the hidden room was awake, and it was angry. A shadow flickered across the periphery of my vision. I whipped around, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, but revealing nothing but empty space. Yet, the oppressive sense of unseen presence was overwhelming. It felt like something was circling us, toying with us before the final terrifying blow. A cold whisper, barely audible but dripping with malice, echoed through the room. It sounded like a voice from beyond the grave, a language both ancient and alien. Mark and David cried out, their faces contorted in terror. The whispers grew louder, multiplying, filling the room with a chilling cacophony of malevolent intent. Panic consumed me. I grabbed a heavy metal wrench from a nearby toolbox, its reassuring weight a small comfort in the face of the unseen horror. We huddled together in the center of the room, backs pressed against each other, a desperate trio against an unknown enemy. The basement temperature plummeted, the air thick with an icy fog that swirled around our feet. Another deafening bang resonated from the hidden room, followed by a low, guttural moan that vibrated through my bones. Tears streamed down my face, a mixture of terror and despair. We were trapped, at the mercy of something far beyond our comprehension. The whispers morphed into a chilling chorus, a malevolent symphony that threatened to shatter our sanity. Just as I thought I couldn't take another moment of this soul-crushing terror, a loud crack pierced the air. The boarded-up window at the far end of the room exploded inwards, showering us with shards of glass. Gasping for breath, we scrambled towards the opening, our only escape route. But as we reached the broken window, a bone-chilling realization dawned on me. This wasn't freedom. This was just the beginning. Chapter 6: Unwelcome Shadows. We tumbled through the shattered window, the cool night air, a brutal shock after the oppressive heat of the basement. Scrambling to our feet, we bolted into the darkness, the chilling chorus of whispers fading behind us like a malevolent lullaby. We didn't stop running until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give way. Finally, huddled together under a sprawling oak tree across the street, we tried to catch our breath. The adrenaline rush was receding, replaced by a bone-deep terror that clung to us like a second skin. We made it, David gasped, his voice trembling. But the relief was fleeting. The horrifying events in the basement were burned into my memory, the chilling whispers still echoing in my mind. Had we truly escaped, or had we brought something back with us? The following days were a blur of sleepless nights and unsettling occurrences. Nightmares plagued me, vivid visions of the hidden room, the darkness pulsating with an unseen malevolent force. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle in the wind, sent shivers down my spine. Then came the strange happenings. Objects moved on their own, books flying off shelves, pictures falling from walls. The once playful barks of my dog, Max, turned into nervous whimpers, his fur bristling at unseen threats. Mark, fueled by a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, started researching the occult, his eyes bloodshot from countless nights spent poring over dusty tomes. David, ever the pragmatist, dismissed these occurrences as stress-induced hallucinations. A simmering tension began to fester between them, fueled by paranoia and suspicion. "It has to be you, Sarah," Mark said one night, his voice accusing. "You must have messed with something down there." "Are you crazy?" I retorted, my voice laced with hurt and anger. "Why would I do that?" David tried to mediate, but the trust that had once bound us was fraying at the edges. We were all on edge, constantly looking over our shoulders, convinced we were being watched by unseen eyes. The local news reports didn't help matters. Strange occurrences started plaguing the neighborhood, pets acting erratically, security cameras inexplicably malfunctioning, reports of disembodied whispers echoing through deserted streets. Each news report was another nail in the coffin of our sanity, a confirmation that the terror we experienced wasn't a shared hallucination. Mr. Henderson's house stood empty, a black hole at the heart of our once peaceful neighborhood. But it no longer felt empty. It pulsed with a malevolent energy, a beacon drawing us back to face the consequences of our foolish curiosity. One particularly unsettling night, I woke up to a cold breeze swirling around me. Although all the windows were shut, the shadows in my room seemed to writhe and twist, morphing into monstrous shapes that taunted me from the corners. Then, a guttural whisper, chillingly familiar, echoed in the darkness. You let it in. I screamed, scrambling out of bed, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Turning on the light did little to chase away the lingering sense of dread. This wasn't a dream. This was real. The entity we'd awoken in the basement was no longer confined to Hendersons Hollow. It had attached itself to us, seeping into our lives, our thoughts, our dreams. And the worst part? It was only just beginning. Chapter 7. Desperate Measures. Exhaustion gnawed at my bones, but sleep was a distant dream. Every creak of the floorboard sent a jolt of terror through me. Every rustle of leaves outside my window sounded like approaching footsteps. The entity, whatever it was playing with us, toying with our sanity. David, usually the voice of reason, had become withdrawn, his eyes haunted by the same fear that gnawed at me. Mark, however, was a different story. His initial bravado had morphed into a desperate determination. He scoured the internet, delving into the darkest corners of the web in search of answers. One afternoon, Mark burst into my room, a frantic glint in his eyes. "I found something," he panted, shoving a dusty library book at me. It was a local history tome, filled with faded photographs and forgotten tales. Buried within its pages, Mark had found a faded newspaper clipping about a reclusive woman named Agnes, rumored to possess knowledge of the occult. A sliver of hope, fragile yet persistent, flickered within me. Desperation propelled us forward. Following a series of cryptic directions, we found ourselves on the outskirts of town, facing a dilapidated Victorian house that seemed to sag under the weight of its own secrets. An old woman with eyes that held the wisdom of ages answered our knock. Agnes, her face etched with 1,000 wrinkles, listened patiently as we recounted our terrifying encounter in Mr. Henderson's basement. At first, skepticism clouded her eyes. "Children's fancies," she muttered, shaking her head. But as we pressed on, detailing the whispers, the moving objects, the chilling presence, a flicker of recognition crossed her features. "Mr. Henderson," she rasped, her voice a dry whisper. He dabbled in things he shouldn't have, things older than time itself. She explained how Mr. Henderson, fueled by a morbid curiosity, had attempted to summon a spirit, a malevolent entity from beyond the veil. His attempt was incomplete, Agnes revealed, resulting in the entity being trapped within the confines of the basement. "But now," she said, her voice grim, "it seems you've unwittingly released it." A cold dread settled in my stomach. We weren't just dealing with a creepy ghost story. This was something far more sinister. But before despair could consume me, Agnes offered a glimmer of hope. "There might be a way to banish it," she said, her voice laced with a hint of uncertainty. "A binding ritual, powerful but dangerous. It requires a personal belonging from each of you, a tether to pull the entity back to where it came from." David spoke first, his voice trembling. "What kind of dangerous?" Agnes met his gaze unflinchingly. "It could backfire. The entity might lash out, and there's no guarantee it won't take one of you with it. A tense silence descended upon us. Fear warred with desperation in my gut. The thought of the ritual failing, of facing the entity's full wrath, terrified me. But the alternative, a life consumed by paranoia and fear, was simply unbearable. "We have to try," Mark finally said, his voice resolute. David and I exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between us. We knew the risks, but we also knew we couldn't run from this forever. With a heavy heart, I nodded in agreement. Agnes, a flicker of something akin to approval in her eyes, laid out the ritual. It was complex, filled with arcane symbols and incantations. A knot of apprehension tightened in my chest as I realized the magnitude of what we were about to face. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was a desperate gamble, a fight for our sanity, our lives, against an entity that thrived on fear and despair. As we gathered our personal belongings, the weight of the decision settled upon us. We were about to venture back into the heart of darkness, armed with nothing but a hope prayer and a desperate plea for survival. The basement, once a place of curiosity, now loomed as a battleground, a crucible where we would face our deepest fears and fight for a chance to reclaim our lives. Chapter 8. The Final Confrontation. The rusted hinges groaned in protest as we pushed open the creaking basement door. The stale, fetid air assaulted us, thick with the smell of damp earth and something far more sinister, the palpable presence of the entity. Flashlights in hand, we descended the rickety stairs, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. The room had transformed since our last encounter. Shadows writhed on the walls, cast by unseen forces. The furniture lay overturned, as if tossed around in a violent rage. A cold mist swirled around the hidden room door, pulsating with an unnatural energy. Agnes's instructions echoed in my mind, a circle of salt to contain the entity, a personal belonging from each of us as a tether, and the chanting of the ancient binding spell. Our voices, shaky and uncertain at first, grew stronger with each repetition, fueled by a desperate need to banish this malevolent force. As we reached the climax of the ritual, the air grew thick with a crackling energy. The whispers, once chilling background noise, erupted into a cacophony of ear-splitting shrieks. The shadows clawed at the edges of the salt circle, tendrils of darkness reaching for us. Suddenly, a gust of icy wind extinguished our flashlights, plunging us into an inky blackness. Panic surged through me, the unseen entity's presence pressing down on me with suffocating weight. A scream ripped from David's throat, followed by a sickening thud. Blind terror propelled me forward. My hand brushed against something warm and sticky blood. David, fear turned to a cold fury as I stumbled towards the center of the room, my voice hoarse as I screamed his name. A guttural roar answered me, a sound that shook the very foundation of the house. A pair of glowing red eyes materialized out of the darkness, burning into my soul. The entity, no longer content with lurking in the shadows, revealed itself in all its horrifying glory. It was a grotesque amalgamation of shadow and bone, its form shifting and pulsating with malevolent energy. I fumbled for my pocket, clutching the silver locket containing my grandmother's picture, my tether to the world of the living. Just as the entity lunged towards me, Mark's voice broke through the cacophony. He had managed to relight his lighter, its flickering flame casting grotesque shadows on the writhing form. He shoved a small leather-bound book into my hand. It was the occult book we found in the basement, the one with the forbidden rituals. "There's another page," he shouted, his voice raw with exertion. There might be a way to banish it for good. My heart pounded against my ribs as I flipped through the brittle pages, my eyes scanning the arcane symbols. There, in a faded script, was a counterspell, a desperate plea for banishment. But it required a sacrifice, a personal belonging imbued with the strongest emotional connection. Tears streamed down my face as I looked at David, his face pale and blood-stained, but his eyes fluttering open. My locket, the one containing a picture of my entire family, the only remaining connection to my deceased mother. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. With a choked sob, placed the locket on the floor within the salt circle. The air crackled with energy as I chanted the counterspell, pouring all my love, my grief, and my desperation into the words. The entity shrieked, a sound that seemed to rip through the very fabric of reality. The basement shook, dust raining down from the ceiling. The salt circle glowed a blinding white, momentarily engulfing the room in its light. Then, with a deafening crack, the entity vanished. The air grew still, the oppressive silence broken only by our ragged breaths. Exhaustion and relief washed over me in a tidal wave. We had done it. We had banished the entity. But at what cost? David lay unconscious, his forehead a nasty gash. And as I looked at the empty space where my locket once lay, a hollow ache settled in my chest. We had escaped the basement, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would forever be a reminder of our encounter with the darkness.